Okay, so we just hit the record button. We can go ahead and get started for our meeting today. Today's meeting, we'll talk about the classification and compensation study. Danielle, I'll turn it over to you to kick off our meeting for us.
Great, thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Danielle Keys, the HR director here at the City of Ventura. And I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce Bob Longmire with Public Sector Personnel Consultants. He's going to be working on our citywide class and compensation study. The purpose of today's presentation is just to walk through the process and also to go over the first steps and some important timelines to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to make sure that your specs are reviewed, your classifications are studied appropriately, and to give you that hands-on opportunity to ask a few questions that you might have. We understand that this is going to be an ongoing process, so this is not the only time to ask questions, but it is a forum where we can do that. In order to ask questions and to triage them today, we're asking you to go ahead and put your questions in the chat box to the Everyone group. If you're not comfortable asking your question to the Everyone group, you can direct message it to me by selecting my name on the drop down in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll try to answer all of those questions at the end, and we'll direct any questions that are specific to the study or the processes directly back over to Bob to answer. And anything that has to do with more infrastructural responses, Valerie Barroso, the assistant director, and myself will be here to answer those questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Bob. Thank you.
Perfect. No, I think that's a great introduction, and I appreciate everybody's time today to talk about the classification and compensation study. So I thought we could start by talking a little bit about what the study is, maybe a little bit about what the study isn't, how we define classification, compensation, and most importantly, what your voice and your process is in this study. So we want to make sure that all of the employees have the opportunity to communicate and to tell us directly what it is that they do, so that we can make sure that we appropriately answer the three questions that we've been tasked with answering. So we'll go into that a little bit in detail, but that's the point of the meeting here today, is to kick off the classification and compensation study and make sure we cover all of those aspects. Again, my name is Bob Longmire with Public Sector Personnel Consultants. As the name suggests, all we do is personnel consulting for the public sector. This is kind of it. We're a one-trick pony. We stay in our lane, and this is all that we do. We get a chance to do maybe 30 or 40 studies a year around the country for classification compensation studies. We're very familiar with the total compensation studies in the LA area, in the union environments. You know, we're very familiar with those questions around how do we handle salary schedule to salary schedule? How do we handle total compensation? We'll talk a little bit more about those here towards the end of the meeting, but this is really all that we do. Before the COVID times, you know, this meeting would be in the city council chambers. We'd have the opportunity to maybe meet face to face, talk a little bit about this. We play a fun game where I try to guess your job title based on your uniform. But, you know, we have to do things a little bit more remotely now and change with the times. But this is something that most organizations do maybe every 5 to 8 years. The point of one of these studies is to recruit and retain quality staff. So that's the objectives. The reason why you do a study is to make sure that we can answer 3 questions. And we're here to answer 3 questions for every job at the city. First, does the job title make sense? Number 2, does the job description accurately reflect what you do? And third, what's the going market rate? That's why we do those studies. If we can answer those questions and if we can strategically respond to the things that we find, it allows us to recruit and retain quality staff. So again, this is something that most organizations do every 5 to 8 years. I think it's been slightly longer since you've done a study, and that's not uncommon that we see that. So it gives us the chance to really look across the organizational structure. You know, things have changed since the last time that maybe your job descriptions have been updated. It's been a while since everybody has looked at them in a holistic way across the entire organization to say, how much of my time is spent on everybody's favorite bullet point, right? That other duties as assigned. How much of my time is spent there versus how accurate is all of the other bullet points for my job description. So we're going to talk about how you can provide us some feedback, how you can provide input and guidance in this so that we can have an accurate understanding of what it is that your position entails. Again, so we can answer those 3 questions. Does the job title make sense? Does the job description accurately reflect what you do? And what's the going market rate? Now, things change from time to time. We understand that we're going to jump on the moving train that is your life and try to document it. It's completely common that things are going to move around. We're going to have some organizational structures. We're going to have some changes. Obviously the pandemic is impacting work functions and tasks and duties in a way that hasn't really happened before. And so we understand that there's going to be some nuances here, but it's our job to try to capture and communicate and document those nuances to make sure that we can accurately answer those 3 questions for every job at the city. Timelines. So just at a very high level, this is kind of day 2 in the project here and getting things rolling. So yesterday we had a meeting and a kickoff, and then at the end of the week, an email is going to go out that contains a link to your existing job descriptions. It's also going to contain the questionnaire that you can complete if you think your job description does not accurately reflect the nature of your work. We're going to talk more about this later, but again, you can work on these as a group. So if you have the same job title as a bunch of other people and you want to give us one questionnaire or maybe one marked up job description with 10 people's names on it, that works great for us. We don't want to burden already busy departments with paperwork or things like that. However, this is a unique opportunity. This is something that's not done every day. It's really important that we have an understanding of what it is that the positions entail, what it is that you do. So we'd say as often as you can, please take this process seriously. Work on these on company time. I'll walk you through it here at the end. But the idea is we want to hear from every employee what it is that they do so that we can go and answer those 3 questions that we talked about earlier. So hearing from the employees is a really important part of that process. We'll walk through more of that here in a little bit. So we want to have the input back from the employees towards the end of February. We're kind of thinking around the 25th time frame. So you have a little bit of time to work on it. Please avoid what I like to refer to as the college homework problem, right? If we give you 3 weeks to do something, please don't start it on the 20th night, right before it's due. Maybe print out your existing job description, start carrying it around with you, cross it out, mark it up, write on it, start taking some notes, start thinking about this. We find it's very common that people are very proficient, very good at doing their job. But at the end of the day, when you actually stop to write about it or you stop to kind of process it, it's a little bit of a trickier task. So maybe get started on this early. Again, you can work on them as a group. You can work on them as a team. You can ask your supervisor for input. There's a bunch of different ways that we can handle getting this information from the employees. But this is really your voice in the process. This is your chance to tell us directly what it is that you do. Now, maybe your job description is perfect. Maybe it accurately reflects what you do and there's no need to change anything. Great, awesome. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So we'll talk about some more of those kind of moving components here in a minute. But really, that's the first process, is the classification side of things. So classification is the first 2 questions. Does the job title make sense? Does the job description accurately reflect what you do? Start to see we kind of need to know what it is that you do in order to answer those questions. So the more you can tell us, the better of a job we can do, suggesting job titles, updating job descriptions, and finding your job out in the market. That's the second part of it, the total compensation study that we'll go into here in a little bit. That's going to kind of begin late spring is what we're targeting to go out and look across the comparators out in the market to say, what's the market going rate for this work? We have the comparators that have been agreed upon in the MOUs, and we can look out and just say, all right, what jobs do you have? What jobs do they have? Compare apples to apples on a salary schedule basis and also on a total compensation basis. How do we stack up salary schedule to salary schedule? How do we stack up total compensation to total compensation? From then, we then owe a report to all the decision makers. We owe a report to city management, to council, to make then the determinations on where are we and how do we want to get from where we are to where we want to be? What does that process look like? How do we move? How do we respond? How do we take into account the information that we now have to say, here's the market going rate? That's when the question of now what begins. That's when council can then weigh in on those decisions, provide guidance, and we can help provide some guidance around what the market going rates are in those conversations. So you can start to see there's a lot of things that need to happen. And this is a little bit of a lengthy process, but again, this is a normal thing that most organizations do, again, every 5 to 8 years, to go out and to do a market study and to say, what's the going market rate for the work that we're performing? Do our job titles make sense? Do our job descriptions accurately reflect what we do? And what's the going market rate? Again, classification, like I'd mentioned before, is the first two components of that. Does the job title make sense? Does the job description accurately reflect what you do? Part of this is making sure that we have the right functions and tasks and duties, the knowledges, the skills, the ability, maybe some of the authority, the accountability, the autonomy. What is some of the questions you'll see on the form, if you go through the entire form, are going to start to look around what is the supervision you receive, what's the supervision you give, what kind of decisions are you making around matters of significance, right? Everybody's favorite phrase, matters of significance. How are we looking in terms of what decisions are you making on the city's behalf? Trying to work all of that into compensation or into classification so that we have an accurate understanding when we use the words like technician, specialist, analyst, coordinator, 1, 2, 3, senior, lead, supervisor, making sure we're using these terms consistently across the department. Couple possible outcomes from the classification side of things. So maybe we have 2 jobs right now that have different job titles. And both of those employees go through this process. They mark up their job description. They print it out. They carry it around with them. They mark up their job description. They make some notes. And we get this information back. And lo and behold, people with 2 different job titles are doing the same thing. Maybe we take those 2 titles where we had 2 titles before. Maybe we recommend that we now have 1 title that both of those employees are in. Again, we're not overhauling everything. We're not changing working conditions. We're not upsetting the apple cart. These are normal classification study things where we say, hey, before we had a little bit of redundancy in our titling. We had a little bit of inefficiency. We had 2 titles, 2 different job titles that were doing the same thing. Maybe we merge those together and we still have 2 people who are doing the same thing. We didn't change anything. We're just changing the title that is associated with that job. Again, very normal, very industry standard classification type of work. Maybe we have the opposite. Maybe we see people who have the same job title right now. And we get these job descriptions back, we get these forms back, and lo and behold, they're doing very different things. Well, maybe that process reverses. Where we had 1 title that both those people were in, maybe now we need different titles because they're doing different work. Again, classification side of things to make those recommendations to say what is the appropriate job title, what belongs on the job description. From there, you can start to see, once we have all of the employees accounted for, once we understand what it is that the employees do, we can ask the question, what's the market going rate? The market going rate's a relatively factual and straightforward question. We can look at the job descriptions, the org charts, the pay plans, the benefit documents, the MOUs from all of the comparators out in the market to say, what's the market going rate? How do we stack up salary schedule to salary schedule? How do we stack up total compensation to total compensation? That really answers the question, where are we? It answers the question, where are we, in a straightforward, factual, data-driven fashion. The policymakers, council, can then weigh in on, where do we want to be? How do we get from where we are now to where we want to be? And what does that process look like? Is that something that could maybe be done in 1 budget year? Do we need more budget years? How do we do this? What does this look like? Now you can start to see all the moving pieces that is involved in a compensation study. That we go through and answer that question, where are we? And how do we move from where we are now to where we want to be? What does that look like? And again, those decision makers, policy, council, unions weigh in on that process to say, what does that look like there? Couple things that are really important here of what the study is not. It's nothing here supersedes the bargaining process. Just because we put it in Excel doesn't make it so. Doesn't circumvent any of the negotiation requirements, the meet and confer, any of those things. This is meant to be data that lives and discussed and has access to for the unions to be able to review, look at, have access to, so that everybody has an accurate understanding of where we are. Relatively straightforward. Here are the numbers. Here's the market going rate. We think this is really helpful. In my travels, I've never met employees or never sat in a room and done a presentation in front of a bunch of people in a council chambers and had people come up to me afterwards and say, hey, listen, I'm really glad you're here. I go into Danielle's office every 2 weeks and I ask her to take money away from me because I'm overpaid, right? We never have that example. There's always a little bit of an understanding, that if you ask an employee, hey, what's the market going rate? That an employee is going to say, oh, I can always make more money going somewhere else. It's an entirely different thing when an objective third party goes out and does a market study to say, hey, here are the market going rates. And for that information to live at the table, for unions to have access to, for city council to have access to management to have access to be able to answer that question, where does it go? What do things look like? So again, also included in this is not a performance evaluation. We're going to ask you to provide input on your job. We're going to ask you to review your job description, to provide guidance, to provide some input. This is not a performance review. We're not looking through this to say, are you good at your job? We're here to learn about the jobs, and you are the subject matter expert for your job. We want to get your feedback. We want to get your understanding. We're going to ask for your supervisor's feedback and your supervisor's understanding of the job. But that's not a review on your performance. We're not here changing working conditions. We're not here to change the workload. We're not here to say, oh, hey, look, we have these 5 people that are doing similar things, but we could, adjust this way, and now we don't need these 2 people. That's not part of this study. We're here to say what's the work that's being performed and what's the appropriate job title, job description, and market going rate for that work. Again, we're trying to also capture some of the changes that have been brought about by technology, some of the changes that have been brought about by the pandemic, making sure that across the city, we're updating all of those job titles, job descriptions, and market going rates to find out. Okay, let me camp here just for a minute on the classification side of things. So again, classification is the first 2 questions. Does our job title make sense? Does our job description accurately reflect what we do? In order to do that, we need to know what you do. So your homework assignment, the thing that we're going to ask everybody to do on Friday, an email is going to go out from HR, and it's going to contain a link to your existing job description. Go ahead and print that out, start carrying it around with you, mark it up, write on it, start thinking about what that could look like. If you find that your job description is great, it perfectly summarizes what you do, it needs no changes, it's awesome, wonderful. Again, we're not going to change anything. Just go ahead and write, the job description's good, turn it into your supervisor. They'll take a look at the job description. Maybe they have some notes, maybe they have some feedback on the job description. Then that's going to get passed to human resources and then over eventually to us. So we want to make sure, again, that we're looking at the job descriptions to make sure that they accurately reflect the work that you perform. Couple thoughts here. The job description is never meant to be a manual for the work. When somebody gets hired and is new into the job, you don't hand them the job description and say, here is absolutely everything you need to know about the position. The job description is meant to be a high-level summary that is an example of the types of functions and responsibilities that you have. We don't need like a 20-page list of all of the duties and all of the small tasks. What we're looking for is the high-level general overview of what it is that you do. Like I said before, you can work on this as a group. If we have 50 different police officers, for instance, and everybody's on a shift and on assignment, we don't need every single person to review them, but maybe we want 5 people to get together as a group and provide us feedback on their rank. And then same thing with the ranks above, so that we have an accurate understanding of what it is that each position entails, again, so that we can update those job titles. So work on them as a group, work on them on city time. We're not expecting you to go home and do this on the weekend, to think about work in the off hours or anything like that. This is not something that's done every day. Again, this is something that does maybe every 5 to 8 years. So it's not an insignificant investment of the city's time to make sure that you have the opportunity to complete this process. I'd say it should take maybe between an hour and 2 hours. If you've had your job description with you for a while and you've been making some notes on it, again, somewhere in the hour to 2 hour time frame to complete this process. And if you have any questions, talk to your supervisor, talk to somebody else who's done the job, ask human resources. However you want to go through this, you don't have to do this alone. It's not meant to be a test or a writing assignment or anything like that. We're here just simply to understand what it is that the job entails. And again, you're the subject matter experts on that individual job. So we want to hear directly from you what it is that you do so we can complete those tasks. Okay, like I said before, you're going to receive an email with a link to your existing job description and the questionnaire. The questionnaire is for if your job description is just maybe a little bit too out of date, that we kind of have to start over. Go ahead and complete the full questionnaire then. Go through, and we'll walk through the questionnaire here in a minute, but go through all of the pages, give us all of the details. It's going to be about an 8-page form. Maybe it take you a little bit longer than an hour, somewhere in the 2-hour time frame, to go through everything, give us all of those details so that we can kind of build this from the ground up on a new job description. And then again, you'll complete that form, sign off on that, hand it to your supervisor. Supervisors, don't change anything the employees wrote. We want to make sure that we have an accurate understanding from the employee what that job entails, and then give us your understanding of what the job entails. There's always some consternation or maybe a little bit of concern we hear very commonly and very frequently in our travels from employees about what's going to happen if our supervisor changes anything. That's not the case. We just want to make sure we have an accurate understanding. If there's ever very big differences between an employee's understanding of the position and the supervisor's understanding of the position, all we do is just raise our hand and ask for a little bit of clarity from HR to make sure that we can get an understanding or maybe a meeting or a call to know what it is that the work is being performed. And if the worst thing that comes from a study is the supervisor and the employee have a better understanding of what the work entails, that's a great thing as well. So that's kind of the reason why we have an additional level of review and another set of eyes on the information so that we make sure we have as much information as possible when we're trying to go through and do our studies. Again, you can work on them as a group. After you complete your review, go ahead and hand them over to your supervisor. Supervisor is going to then submit them to HR so that we can have all of these back sometime late February, early March timeframe so that all of our work can then begin. Imagine what lands on our desk, all of these questionnaires, all of these marked up job descriptions, and then we start going through suggesting titling, updating job descriptions, and finding these jobs out in the market. Imagine one hand, one screen here is the marked up job descriptions, the forms, and then on the other one is the salary, the job descriptions, salary schedules, org charts, pay plans, and MOUs from the jobs out in the market to say, all right, who has similar education, experiences, functions, tasks, duties, authority? What are these jobs? Where does this fall? What does that look like? The form itself, here's what this looks like, just kind of a brief overview to give you an example of what that full form looks like. If you need to go through and complete that, I don't have really a way to estimate how many people will need to go through the entire process. We're going to leave that to you. If you're looking through your job description and it looks close and if you feel like it's a pretty accurate representation, just needs a couple tweaks, then maybe write on your job description, maybe make some notes on another piece of paper, attach it to your job description. However you want to do that works for us. If you need to then go through the full process, complete the form here, the questionnaire, give us your names and departments, just housekeeping things so we know which job we're talking about. Page 2 is usually everybody's least favorite page, but it's kind of my favorite page because it gives us all of those functions and tasks and duties. If you think about your existing job description, it has those bullet points. This is where we're going to build those bullet points from. Maybe 3 to 5 sentences, somewhere on that order in these spots here so we can understand what it is that each one of those functions do. From there, give us a percentage of time. Be honest with you, percentage of time is always a little bit of a tricky question to ask. The reason we do that is we're trying to understand where you're spending the majority of your time. And, is this a task that you just perform occasionally and rarely, or is this something that's a critical function that you do day in and day out? Maybe your job is very routine. You show up 9 to 5 every day. It's the same thing Monday through Friday. There's 15 people with your job, and it doesn't necessarily change that much. If that's the case, maybe give us a percentage of time in terms of a day or a week. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe your job is highly variable. It changes, maybe summer to winter, or you've been here 12 years and no day has ever been the same. Maybe think in terms of your percentage of time, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a quarter or a year. However you want to kind of break down that percentage of time works for us. We'll follow and kind of keep track of what you're talking about. Try to make these numbers add up close to 100. If these come back at 110%, we can't get you a raise based on the formulas or based on how much those numbers add up to. But again, try to give us an understanding of where you're spending your time so that we can know what those duties are. A couple of the other pages here, maybe put on your human resources hat for a minute. Think about the education, the experience, the certifications that you need to have for the job. I always like to think minimums here. If somebody has their doctorate and they want to come to work for the salary level that's offered, awesome, that's great. You can always go above the minimum, but think minimum education, minimum experience. Do we have to have a degree in something, a specific industry certification? Do I need that certification day one? Is this something where we can hire somebody, train them to get that certification, and then maybe 6 months later they test for it and then they can get that certification? Or, are you a school bus driver and I need my CDL with my passenger endorsement, or that bus isn't moving Monday morning at 7 a.m.? What are these examples look like for education, certifications, licensing, those kind of things? Finally, maybe some working conditions, some supervisory responsibilities. The supervisory responsibility section is really helpful in understanding maybe some of the differences between a 1, a 2, a 3, a senior, a lead, a supervisor, a manager. You start to see how those supervisory responsibilities look different. Do you have the responsibility of assigning people work, reviewing work, checking off that they have completed that work, that it's to the best industry standards? What does this look like here? What kind of supervision are you giving? What kind of guidance are you receiving? Those types of things are what we're looking for here on that form. Finally, this is the link to the job descriptions. You're going to get this link in an email. You don't have to write it down or, hurriedly scrabble it down. We just wanted to show you. Go ahead and when that link comes over, best advice I can give, when that link comes out, click on it, find your job, print out your job description, carry it around with you for a week. Just start thinking about this. Start thinking about those 3 questions. Does my job title make sense? Does my job description accurately reflect what I do? And then third, do we have enough information in that job description and in your notes to find your job out in the market? So the better you can do to help us in those 3 processes, the more accurate our project and the more accurate our recommendations will be. So again, take this seriously. This is something most organizations do 5 to 8 years. So we won't be back, in 3 weeks asking you to do this again. So again, please take the time. Please take that seriously. And that's all I have for today. And I'll pause here to see if Danielle has gotten any questions or if there's anything else that we need to address for the meeting.
Thank you so much, Bob. Yeah, at this time, we have not received any questions. I just want to remind everybody that if you do have questions after the presentation, please feel free to email us through the HR email box. You can also email staff input at the City of Ventura email address, the one we use for our all staff meetings. And throughout the process, if you have additional questions, please send them our way, and we're happy to coordinate with Bob on any of those items that are specific to the work that the consultant firm is doing for us. So I believe that concludes our meeting. Thank you so much, Bob. And any final thoughts, Valerie or Bob?
We do have a couple questions in the chat. The first question is, how would you identify the difference between a lead, a senior, and a supervisor designation? That one is for you, Bob.
So in those instances, we're talking about the difference between the supervision that they give. So if you're loosely informed, let's say I have a 1, a 2, a 3, or let's say I have a worker, senior worker, lead worker relationship, I would expect that person who's the worker to be learning about the job. I would expect them to be needing some close supervision, some close guidance. If this is a working environment, somebody's looking over your shoulder. So that's kind of what we would expect from a worker level job. As we start to add senior or maybe a 2 to that, you're going to be providing some guidance to that person. You're going to be looking over their shoulder. You're going to be providing some training. You're going to be providing some of your knowledge, your experience, some of your lessons that you have learned over that. You're not going to be officially responsible for all of their performance evaluations, any of their training materials. As we start to get to the lead, we might have some duties around scheduling. We might have some responsibilities around officially training. Somebody might tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I need you to take this new employee under your wing for the next month and get them trained in this process. So we start to look around those levels of that. We have a matrix that we go through to look at, is this a senior, is this a lead? Also, when we're talking about 1s and 2s and 3s, I start to look at certifications. There's going to be some jobs where we have water distribution, treatment, collections, certifications that designate the differences between 1s and 2s and 3s. And then often we start to see that the amount of supervision you receive goes down as your level goes up. The amount of guidance, supervision, lead responsibilities you have goes up with your number as well. So combination of supervision received, supervision given, and levels of certifications really help us lock in on those seniors and leads as well.
I don't see any other questions, Danielle.
Great. Okay, so one of the questions that did come in, just so that you guys are aware, was a request for the link there is another question that just populated, but and we'll go over that one. But the link for the job descriptions will go out with the email on Friday. Just a reminder that will go out on Friday for those that were trying to catch it on the actual presentation. And then the latest question that came in was, what is the difference between standby and on-call on the form? So I don't know if Bob, if you have a definition that your organization uses, or
we would refer to the MOU. Jared, I can talk to you about BMEA's MOU in that regard.
Perfect, thank you. All right, just another minute to see if any last minute questions come in. Otherwise, please, feel free to go ahead and email us over at HR, and we'll triage those questions and make sure we get them over for answering as soon as possible. So thank you guys all for your time. Thank you, Bob. And I think that is it for today.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'll go ahead and end the recording, and have a great rest of your day.